Hi, welcome to Updata. My name's David Linton, and I've just done a short report on the Dow Jones, just looking for the 10 stocks in the Dow Jones Index, and I thought I'd just do a accompanying video for those of you who got the report, just to see how I've done it. Really, really simple. I've actually taken this list from Thomson Reuters Icon, just took it out of Icon and copied the list in. You can do the same from Metastock. You could also use Yahoo. So if you're just using a free feed like Yahoo, you could just use the Dow 30 here. But for the moment, I'm using Metastock or Thomson Reuters Icon, the same system. And so it's really simple. I've got my four charts. I've got a weekly chart here. There's a cloud chart, so I'm bullish if I'm above the cloud. I've got a 1% log scale point and figure chart, so this is a long-term chart, giving me upside targets. And then I've got the medium-term daily chart with a volume chart and a relative strength to the Dow Jones Index. And here I've got the 0.5% point and figure chart, which is my medium-term chart. So I'm just reading these targets off. We see we've got an upside target of 35% in the Dow. That's quite a big move. We've broken out of this consolidation pattern, so we've got further to run, and we see this medium-term upside target of 13%. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking for the top 10 stocks. And I'm forcing myself to stick with 10. So when I click on these charts, these are called tracker charts, and they all just change to the chart that I've clicked on. So here's 3M. This is in a long-term downtrend. We've got a downside target, so that's definitely not making, and a downside target here, definitely not making my top 10. Amex is the next one in the list, and here we see we are just breaking to new highs, so that's looking quite good. We've got good upside targets here, one much the same as the index. The medium-term chart not as clear, and I'd often look to my 60-minute charts, but given the trend, both bullish on medium and long term with that upside target, the Amex makes it into one of my top 10. If I then go to look at my Apple is the next one on the list, and Apple's just no denying this is a bullish chart. Might have run a long way, but we've still got upside targets. I'm 10% higher. Medium term, we've probably run a long way. You want to watch the 60-minute charts for any setbacks, but we are seeing here that's looking pretty bullish as well. Boeing we're seeing is not looking so good. So I've got Amex and Apple so far in my top 10. Boeing breaking down into a long-term downtrend. Medium term we've been bearish. Of course, lots of bad news on Boeing, but we are just seeing the fall lower. Caterpillar's the next chart on the list. And again, we're just struggling with Caterpillar. It might be a recovery stock. We do have some upside targets, but the chart is just struggling here. We see the relative turning over. So it's just not quite good enough to make it into our top 10. Looking at Chevron now, and of course you can do this with any list of stocks, and here we see Chevron just breaking lower on the long-term and medium-term chart. Downside targets not good enough to make it into our top 10. Cisco Systems looking to find support here on the long-term chart in the cloud and on the point and figure 1% chart, and we're seeing here the daily breakout. Relative not as strong, but the on-balance volume is trending higher, and we've got this good upside target. So Cisco is one of our top 10, and then we look at Coca-Cola. We see here we are breaking new highs here. Multiple upside targets, although they're not not a long way away. We do still have upside, and here we do have upside as well, and breaking higher. The volume trend looking very good, and the relative probably just turning a corner. So Coke wins a place in our top 10. Looking at Dow Inc., not looking so good here. The daily chart just breaking down and a downside target. And if we look at Exxonmobil, much the same here. Bearish trend. Downside targets, multiple downside targets. This is a real dog of a stock looking to break to new lows here. All the downside targets pointing that way. Goldman Sachs, on the other hand, is recovering, looking very bullish, breaking out of a triangle pattern here. Multiple upside targets on the long-term chart and on the medium-term chart. Volume trend is good, and the relative is good. So Goldman's is in the top 10. Home Depot is next, and they're just struggling to break to new highs. they are in an uptrend. They are just bullish above the cloud, and we do have good upside targets, but it's just a little bit of a worry on that relative trend, and there's probably quite strong resistance there. So not quite scraping it into the top 10. Home Depot, on the other hand, Intel on the other hand, is breaking out of a really nice big range here. Good upside targets. If you want to see the targets on the updated chart, go to full screen and you'll see them more clearly. But here we see 20% and 31%. Those are good targets. Here we've got good targets on the medium term. Volume trend looking good, and the relative breaking up as well. So Intel just making it in. IBM, on the other hand, still in a bit of a downtrend. They are just breaking into bullish territory, but there are downside targets hanging over us, so not quite good enough. Johnson & Johnson looking a little bit better here and just breaking to new highs. So quite nice to find a stock that's just breaking out. We've got good upside targets. The volume trend is already running higher, and that's a clue that we probably are going to break out higher. A bit of a medium-term shortage there on targets, but still looking pretty good. Jpmorgan Chase, looking at them, they're looking pretty good too, breaking to new highs, bullish on both charts there, good upside targets. They make the top 10. McDonald's, and if we look at McDonald's, we see here that we are not quite breaking. We're just breaking out there, but we do have this downside target hanging over us, just not quite performing, and that volume trend just not breaking to new highs either. So probably okay, but just not enough to make it into the top 10. Merck actually almost made it into the top 10, but just that the targets are not quite high enough. So there's just stocks with more upside potential based on these targets, and we are just seeing the relative underperforming, so Merck doesn't quite make it in. Microsoft, on the other hand, has had a stellar performance, looking really strong. We've got good upside targets here, still more to play for, as much as 23%. Short, medium term, 8%. Keep an eye on those 60-minute charts for any setbacks. Great trends. Microsoft is a top 10 in the Dow. Nike, if we look at Nike here, again, a really good performance, just the lack of good upside targets here. Targets have been reached, and there's no new targets to play for. A very strong chart, no denying, but it's just the fact that we don't see the upside potential and targets that's just kept Nike slightly out of the top 10. Looking at Pfizer, again, they're bearish on that long-term chart with downside targets, so they're not going to go in our top 10. Looking at Procter & Gamble, nice trend here, amazingly clear uptrend. We'll know when this trend ends because it's been so clear. Upside still of 27% and 10% medium term. Good volume trend. They're going to make it into the top 10 as well. Travelers Co, we see here, they're not looking as good, and downside targets hanging over us, so they're not in the top 10. United Tech, and the key thing here is they are breaking to new highs, and they do look pretty good actually, and they almost make it into our top 10. It's just this relative performance. They are just almost on the verge of making it in. And if we look at United Healthcare Group, they are breaking higher, and again, they almost make it into the top 10 just for the lack of good upside targets. And we're nearly full. We're just really don't have much scope to add any more to our top 10. Here we see Verizon. Again, lots of multiple upside targets. Quite a good one here. That downside target, just a little bit of a worry. Almost made it into the top 10, but not quite. So we've already found our 10 stocks, and I'll reiterate them in a second. And we see Visa, again, looking strong, but it's just the lack of upside targets. Walgreens, Boots, again, they're just not looking great. They've got downside targets, and we're bearish on the trend. Walmart, also just struggling. We're seeing here they're just starting to look a little bit bearish on that medium term. There are upside targets, but that medium term daily chart is a worry. And last of all, Walt Disney, also just not managing to look very good there on the relative. We do have upside targets, but that relative performance and that fall away while the Dow is looking strong is a worry. So our upside stocks are in the top 10. We've got Amex, we've got Apple, we've got Cisco, we've got Coke, we've got Goldman Sachs, we've got Intel, we've got Johnson & Johnson, Jpmorgan, and Microsoft, and Procter & Gamble, and those are our top 10, and those are the ones that are in the report. If you haven't seen the report, you should see it landing on your desk any day, but just wanted to show you the process. And remember, you can get a trial of Updata at any time, and you can do this same process on any list of stocks you want. running on lots of different data services. That's it for now. Why not have a check of the report? Until then, or take a trial and run this on any stock you like. Happy charting. See you soon.